Hey, Brooke, it's great to have you on the Scale podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Hi, Sabrina. How are you?
Doing great. So glad you got to join us. We're talking about a topic today that a lot of folks have brought up in our community. So we just wanted to put this resource together because you're doing a lot of work in the space. Of course, you've had to deal with it
Yeah,
yourself. So we'll go through some questions and interesting issues, topics, and solutions for this candidate fraud problem.
absolutely. It's interesting in our community how many people are like, "Yes, can we please talk about this topic?" And so many of us are dealing with it on different levels. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. I will hand it over to you for a quick introduction. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about you, your background, what you're working on, and then we can dive into the topic a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. Well, so I'm Brooke Sullivan. I work here at Hyperproof, which is a fast growing startup in the SaaS space in compliance, risk, and security. And I have been in the people and talent space well over a decade now, leading recruitment teams and people operations. I work so closely with hiring managers from, C-suite down to the first time hiring manager that's just starting out in both large organizations as well as startups that are fast growing and scaling. And so I've worked mostly remote in 100% remote organizations for the last couple of years. And so this is definitely a hot topic when it comes to candidate risk and fraud that is becoming much more prevalent in this space. Our company today is based mostly within the US, but we do have some folks in EMEA and LATAM. So our teams are growing and we're hiring globally as well. And so it's becoming even more prevalent with our global teams as well.
Well, I know that I'd first come in contact with you or reached out to you around your LinkedIn presence. You have so many really great high value posts for the community and a lot of
Yeah.
followers. So excited to have you here. I know you've talked a little bit about candidate fraud on LinkedIn, but we'll dive into that a little bit more. So maybe you can give us a quick overview of what is the problem with candidate fraud, a quick history of it, how you came across it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I first came across it and we started to get some very strange profiles coming in. And so started to dig into the topic probably about 18 months ago in a much more deep way, looking at what is happening on the market, what are some other organizations. And I came across a really interesting news article that came out around the topic where they were noticing a higher volume at this organization of fake actors and fraudulent candidates coming through the interview screening, mostly on the technical side. It seems to be a space where they often show up because it is a little bit of a different space where there's more repetitive work or work that can be repeated multiple times. And so those candidates can very much more easily kind of make it through the screening and the technical screening and then get into passing a hiring and background check. And so we started to see it much more. I think in like Q1 of last year we started to see a huge increase and jump in fraudulent candidates coming through our pipeline. And I want to talk about, and we'll get into this, of ways that we started noticing and the patterns we started recognizing, understanding that they were fake actors. We are seeing them more and more from mostly Asia and organizations or locations in Asia, but we're starting to see Russia start to play a big role too in fake candidates and fake profiles. So it's going to be something that's evolving pretty quickly. And I imagine by the time this podcast comes out, there's going to be new things coming out in this space. There is definitely CNBC did an article on it. There's a few others. ABC did an article on it, and just really trying to figure out what's happening and how can companies safeguard themselves to making sure that these candidates aren't getting through and getting to what's most precious, which is your product or your customer data.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a complex issue too, because it used to be that you could very easily send a fake profile, but now being able to pass those background checks and pass the interviews and the
Yeah.
technology enablement that's led to a much more complex problem, I
Yeah,
think.
it's getting much scarier, the sophistication and the level of sophistication that they're utilizing. And so I actually got to read a recent FBI article where they're starting to follow the breadcrumbs of how they're able to find these folks, but they're not necessarily going after the individuals. They're going after the money that they're trying to follow. So where are these people sending their money back to? Who are they working with, and how can the FBI really intervene much faster to stop these fake actors from getting into corporations.
Absolutely. Super interesting to see all of the solutions around it and how that's going to evolve. What are the potential costs for a company? You mentioned that, of course, getting access to customer data as well, but are there any other ramifications or stories that you've heard around fake candidates and what that means for a company, especially a startup, right?
Yeah, and I think startups are targeted because they look like they're easy targets. They're new, their processes are evolving. There's multiple people in the process touching a candidate profile, touching the interview process. So there's a lot more cracks in the foundation to getting through. And so I think startups are targeted 100% remote companies because if you're never going to physically see a person face to face in a room, it's much easier to get through and to pretend you are who you say you are. But as far as the costs associated, I mean, we could go on and on, Sabrina, about what the costs could be. But I mean, we can start with time in general. So the wasted time with the recruiter, how many conversations. We were at a point, I think in Q2 of last year, where every other candidate was a fake profile. And so, our poor recruiter was sitting on calls, every other one being like, this is a fake person and I had to hang up, or this was an AI deep fake, or they were using AI to do their coding practices. And so there were so many ways that they were trying to kind of get into the business, and it just became a huge time suck. So there's a lot of that, we can talk about kind of resources on the front end. Then you think about team morale, like a new hiring manager that's just starting out, that's trying to hire a great candidate. They get so excited. They see a great profile. They're really excited to do an interview. And then they find out it's a fake person. That can really, you know, affect their confidence in hiring and affect their confidence in evaluating candidate profiles. So that can be a huge cost to your business. But I mean, ultimately, if they get through, so if this person, meets all the requirements, gets through the interview process, passes a background check, which they're able to do, they have fake documentation, and they get into your business, the cost can be exponential. And it depends on what they have access to. I mean, a lot of software organizations like ourselves have a lot of safeguards in place, so they can't get through to customer data or to certain areas of the system. But let's say they could, that can be very risky for a business.
So it sounds like the stakes are very high in these
Yeah.
situations. And as we mentioned before, very complex situations. So is there anything currently being done to fix it? Have you found any solutions or resources that are
Yeah,
aimed
so
at this problem?
there's probably tiering of solutions. I would say, initially there's patterns you're going to look for. So if you can't, let's say you're a startup or a small organization, you can't make investments in new tools. That's okay. Some of the things that I would initially look for are some patterns. So their new, if their LinkedIn profile is relatively new, if their email address is relatively new, which you can look up. How recently was this email address created? You could also look up their phone number. If it's a voice over IP, typically that's a little bit of a flag, not always a flag, but one that I would say in general is if they don't have a cell phone number listed and they're using a voice over IP, they typically are a faker profile. And so I would say those patterns could be initial. The other, the second tier of it is if you can pay for some additional layers within your applicant tracking system. We utilize Greenhouse. There's a lot out there, but Greenhouse is turning on a feature called Clear that's going to really help you on the hiring side, understand the multiple thresholds that someone needs to go through in order to qualify to be hired. But there's also Tofu, which I've been watching, and I got a great opportunity to utilize them on a demo and then implement them on a few roles for us. And they are incredible at evaluating the risk of a profile. So they're looking at multiple touch points of a profile and letting you know and flagging, hey, this could be a risky profile before you even get to interviewing them. So really saving you some time on the front end. There's some other ones, other tools coming out, especially for screening video calls. There's some tools coming out to understand if they're using AI, if they're using some filters on their Zoom profile, if their API is pinging off of a location that they're not in. You can start to look at some of those too. So there's some other tiers and layers, but there's a lot evolving in this space, and recruiters are getting much smarter because it's happening more and more. So we're seeing it, but we are, if you are in a talent acquisition seat, you're the first line of defense for your company to make sure that these folks aren't getting through. And so the more we can talk to each other and share, what are you seeing? What's the weird thing out there? Like, oh, I asked someone what the weather was in Wisconsin because that's where they said they were. And they're like, oh, it's beautiful in 75. It's like, well, it's January. That's probably
Um,
not exactly what the weather is in Wisconsin today. So there's some ways too of like questions folks are starting to ask to get a little deeper. And
yeah, it's really interesting the human element of the solution too, because on the one hand, we can, of course, build more technology, and there's all these great
sure,
resources around identifying, but at the end of the day, technology will continue to build on itself, and these actors will get smarter and they'll have new technology. It'll
yeah,
kind of see it becoming like turtles all the way down, right? So there's always going to be that human. We've got
yeah,
to have that touch and that foresight to be able to look at it and just use common sense around, is this a fake profile,
yes.
and be able to make judgment calls based off of that. So I guess on that
It can
topic,
be
okay, so
really challenging
yeah,
to do just that, like what you're mentioning, not to cut you off there, but
no,
I think it's also getting like digging deeper on the interview questions, like giving someone a situational based question that has multiple layers. Did they really do the work? Did they really do what they're saying they've done? Like we've done that for years as recruiters, but continuing that practice and encouraging hiring managers to do just the same thing. Because often hiring managers love a good resume and they're like, tick, 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 this person checks every box. Well, it's like, trust but verify, really dig in. Like, okay, if that person really did do XYZ at XYZ company, dig in. Like, what was it? What was the result? How did they measure success? How would they do it differently in the future? Really get investigative. I think the flip side of that is not implementing too much bias. I think I've seen the other side of it too, where people are so adverse to potentially being in a fraudulent situation that they're creating bias, and that's where you got to walk this delicate line between investigating and being curious while also not implementing some bias practices or some risk practices on the other end on employment law. So it's kind of this fine line that you're walking of, is this risky? Is it not? And being consistent in your practices too.
right. And there's the candidate experience aspect of it too,
Yeah,
right?
it can be tough. And again, that goes back to that new hiring manager and just supporting them. I'll even sit on interviews with hiring managers as they're starting and just say, I loved how you went into this question. This is how I would have done it, to dig a little deeper. Or, oh, I noticed you went into this space. Here's how you can evolve that question. Just walking alongside them, making sure they have the support they need. Can be all the difference in getting quality candidates through and building a nicer candidate experience. But I worry too, are folks who are neurodivergent that don't always have incredible communication skills, sometimes in a Zoom interview or over a web interview, is how do we create a really good candidate experience for them without doing some of these practices and really making them feel like we're not giving them a fair opportunity to qualify. So it's like you mentioned, it's very delicate, but the more you see it, it's a muscle that you're working, and the more you practice it, I think the better you get at it. And then pair and share, your recruiters are your frontline team. Like, okay, what did we notice on candidate fraud this week? How can we talk to each other? What are some of the things that you're doing that's helping to make sure that these folks aren't getting through? I think the more we can share that knowledge, the better off we're all going to be.
Absolutely. So say you're in an interview or through any part of the process, and your hiring manager comes to you, or maybe you come back and say, I think this is a fake profile. I mean, what do you do at that point? Is there a playbook, or do you just have to kind of play it by ear?
Yeah, I think look for those patterns, like we talked about, looking for the LinkedIn profile, the email, the phone number, some first key indicators. If the resume is too perfect, you can even put it into ChatGPT or Claude and say, was this generated by AI? And even that, like, yes, it was. Here's what, we found. Those are some key, initial things. But then trust and verify, if it doesn't come back or those patterns aren't shown, okay, maybe we interview this person and we dig in a little deeper and figure out if, the situational based questions or some other things we can look at are going to be more prevalent as a telltale sign if this person is who they say they are or not. Um, you'll often see if a candidate is an actor on an interview, if they start to feel like you're catching them out, they'll fake connection issues. Their Wi-Fi somehow goes down, or they didn't hear you and they ask you to repeat yourself, and or they're like, "You're breaking up," and then they hang up on you. They're pretty quick to notice when they've been found out, and they jump off the call very quickly. So, I mean, as soon as you start to poke and prod, or it's like one of those sweaters, you pull at the thread. As soon as you start pulling, it will unravel pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And you mentioned AI in this work as well, and AI in resumes. And I know that a lot of candidates use AI to enhance their resumes and, of course, make it more fitting to the job description. I think everyone's of the opinion that as long as you use it honestly, that's probably not a terrible thing. But if you're talking to a candidate saying they're using AI for their resume, but they don't want to be screened out as a bot, is there any way that they can safeguard that or maybe make their resume stand
Yeah.
out while using AI?
I think it's absolutely use AI for all the things that it's great at, and it does help support your resume. But if you're not active on LinkedIn, like if your profile was just created last week and you have no connections and there's no engagement, that's usually a flag that that person is probably fraudulent. If their phone number is not a real phone number, if it's a voice over IP, that's usually another flag. So there's some other things. It wouldn't just be that someone used AI in their resume, because I think everyone does these days, and that's more of the norm than not. I think it's the patterns that you're trying to look for. It's not one thing; it's multiple things that are raising concern.
Yeah, and it's all about what you can control, it sounds like too, because obviously you can't control fake candidates applying to
Right.
your jobs, at least not for now, right? Maybe we'll get a tool that does that, but
Yeah.
what you do have control of is those pattern recognitions and then what you can do to help train hiring managers and train yourself to be a bit more aware of the situation.
Yeah.
How do you see this issue evolving in the future? Because we're right in the middle of it where nobody really knows exactly what to do about it. It's going to evolve more. It might get worse before it gets better. Do you have any sense of where it could be going?
Yeah, I think the dangerous thing is they're getting smarter. So, these candidates that are applying work for organizations that are very well organized. If you take, three different fake actor interviews, they're almost identical. So they have a playbook that they're running. They have a way that they know that that's how you run your interview. So the larger organizations, I think, are more at risk than some of our startups where, you only have 2 to 3 points of entry, whereas, a Fortune 500 has, maybe a team of 60 recruiters and many more points of entry. And so I think they're getting much smarter to play in the larger field because they know what an interview looks like at those larger companies. It's a matter of, you know, once they figure that out, they're getting referral bonuses. They're referring their friends. They're getting multiple people into that company from the same playbook. And that's where it gets really risky. So I think it's once, and if you have an employee that's onboarding that you're curious if they are an AI actor or if they are, fraudulent, pause hiring, pause their onboarding, make sure you can verify more details before they come into the business, and prevent that risk from happening. But yeah, I think the dangerous thing is that it's going to continue, and it's continuing to evolve, and it's only going to get smarter. So I think the more we as talent professionals can stay up on it, the better off we'll be.
Yeah. And it's such a cross-functional issue too, like you mentioned before, like really being involved with your hiring teams and all the different teams that are involved in the interview process as well, making sure they're trained and aware. It's a people problem, but it's a problem for everyone to deal with together because it affects everyone at the end of the day.
Yeah, we definitely see it more on the technical side,
Yeah.
software engineers, program analysts, anything along those lines. But I can see it eventually creeping into the go to market side of the organizations,
Mm.
BDRs, analysts, RevOps, Salesforce, admins, anything along those lines. I could see them coming through because, again, it's repetitive behavior that they're able to replicate and effectively communicate that they can do. And so once they learn that, they're able to kind of get through the interview process pretty quickly.
Course. So going off of that, you've shared so many really fantastic practical tips on leaders and what we can do to recognize patterns, how we can train our teams. if you're a startup leader, either a people team of one, for example, or maybe you're a co-founder that's handling hiring, what are the non-negotiables in how you start to tackle this issue from everything you've mentioned, or maybe new topics as well?
Yeah, trust but verify. I think what you want to do is like if a candidate seems too good to be true, they probably are. Like no one's perfect. There's always a room for opportunity or room for learning or, what you ultimately wanted in that candidate or their background. So I think dig in. A lot of people are like, oh, what, couldn't you just check references? Well, yes, but even references can be fraudulent too. So as much as I would love to rely on more humans to prevent error, I think it's really being much more investigatory yourself of I need, to verify employment from these previous organizations myself. I need to make sure that they are at the address that they say they are. I had a coworker, or not a coworker, a colleague in my network. They have the new hire employee hold up their new laptop in front of their physical house and take a photo. And I think, maybe if that's a safeguard for now, that's working for them because it proves that that individual lives at that residence and where the laptop was delivered, and that's who they say they are. So if we have to do that, then we have to do that. But I think photos can be, AI generated too. So you
Right.
never know. It's going to continue to evolve. But I think the non-negotiables are trust your candidates, but verify. Like really dig in and make sure what they say they can do and what they are doing is accurate because you're the first line of defense. So if you're getting that spidey sense of this seems too perfect, it probably is, and you can investigate that further.
That's great advice. It's the balance between you want to lead with trust, but also you are that safeguard and that steward of all of your customer data, and you need to act in a way that's responsible around that
Exactly.
as well.
Yeah.
So really appreciate that and appreciate all of the practical guidance and tips you've given. Are there any other areas around the topic that we haven't dove into today yet, or any kind of final thoughts on candidate fraud and where to go from here?
I think, the tough thing that I'm finding is once you find a fraudulent candidate, there's no way to let anyone know that that person is fraudulent. And so we were talking about it in our recruiter network the other day that like I wish we could just all share the profiles that are fraudulent, but you can't. But the FBI is in a place that they are trying to collect these profiles. So there is a reporting function with them if you'd like to, report one that you're seeing more often or you're seeing kind of a chronic applicant that's coming in over and over and over again. It's fraudulent. You can report it, but there's not much else you can do as far as, letting others know because it is confidential when candidates apply. So I think it's, if you see something new in this space that you're like, oh, this is what they're trying now, just as a heads up, flag it to your fellow recruiters because that's how we kind of learn from each other and learn, how to safeguard our own companies with each other. And, conversations like this or, sharing and pairing is a great way to make sure that we're staying in front of it.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you again for all of your practical advice. I think this is going to be an incredible resource for our community. And to plug a little bit as well, any of our community members listening or watching or people who are interested in it, please be sure to go follow Brooke on LinkedIn because that's how I got introduced to you, Brooke. And I thought your content was so relevant for the TA and startup community.
Thank you for building House of Visionaries where we can all connect and chat. It's a really great group. So appreciate you.